got the first gate kind of completed up here at the upper pasture, and you can see we got our cowboy latch kind of going. We've got to get the receiver welded on, but I've had a little bit of issue with the height problem. I measured it according to our mock-up, and I have a little bit of clearance problem down here on the bottom. There's about a 1/2 inch of clearance. And so I racked my brain trying to figure out, did I get the holes right? Because these hinges aren't lined up exactly to those hinges, and so I had to make some modifications to the holes that we cut in, and I thought, did I leave clearance here on the bottom? And I went through this thing over and over in my mind, and then it occurred to me. I had raised that bottom rail up just a little bit, and it made all the difference in the world. And so I can adjust it, not a problem, but now that I'm going and working on the next one, I'm going to try to not make that mistake again, so I'll measure and measure to make sure it fits the pattern. Abraham was told early on that God was going to build a mighty nation out of him and that he was going to have a child. And as you know the story, they decided to help God out a bit. Sarah contrived an idea that she would bring in Hagar, and she would have her child through the loins of Hagar. Now, we've discussed that this is a cultural thing that they would do, but it definitely was not a thing of faith, and it wasn't something that God planned for. And so they started out their journey in a wrong path. This was not faith. And we're going to see that it really compounds and it creates a lot of problems. Kind of like here. Where's my problem? Where did it all start? Well, it started at the very foundation. So they began to kind of build on this thing. They have Ishmael from Hagar. God's promise is fulfilled through Sarah, and they have Isaac. Then when the two began to grow a little bit, we find that Ishmael begins to mock Isaac. This upsets Sarah, and she wants Hagar and Ishmael sent away. Well, we've heard this before. It happened when Hagar began to look at Sarah wrong and create an issue, and they sent her away. And so God said to Hagar, I'll take care of you. And here in the midst of all this mess, we see God trying to work things out. But it started with a look, and then a word, and in the end, we're going to see it's going to be an absolute disaster between Israel and the Arab nations. It's going to be a mess. We have an adage, and it's been around since the Greeks. I think Benjamin Franklin got a little bit of credit for it. And it is, God helps those who help themselves. And you might think, well, that's an old saying, and nobody really pays too much attention to that anymore. Well, that's not so. Barna did a survey. 75% of young people believe that adage. My question is, does that subscribe to what Sarah and Abraham did? Or is that more akin to what we read in James? I think that if we're not careful, it can be what Sarah and Abraham contrived with Hagar more than what James says. Now, what's the difference? See, Sarah and Hagar were going to help God out, but they were going to do it in a way that was inconsistent with God's plan. God's plan required faith, and God was going to do the work. He was going to take a womb that was barren and make it fruitful. What's a good example? Well, when you go into the New Testament and you take a look at when the disciples were in the midst of the storm and Jesus come walking on the water, and Peter says, Lord, if that's you, bid me to come. And the Lord said, come. When Peter was out there on the water, that was faith. That was faith. That was Peter working with the Lord. He got out of the boat. He trusted in God. He kept his eyes on God, and God took care of it. Boy, I tell you what, when you look at these devotionals, you see that on their road to faith, Sarah and Abraham faced a lot of storms, and they got themselves in a mess, and they were sinking at times. But we see that God saved them, and he also took care of Hagar. The devotional says here at the end, when things get tough, God has promised to take care of you. Even when Peter began to sink, he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord rescued him. I don't know where you are today, but cry out to the Lord. He will rescue you. God bless you. Keep the faith. Keep looking up.